Welcome back to the deep dive. This time we're going to wade through a sea of U.S. politics and policy under a second Trump presidency. And boy, have you given us a lot to wade through. News articles, blog posts, even some pretty intense social media threads. Honestly, just skimming it all gave me a little information overload. But that's where you come in, right?
Absolutely. We're here to sort through it all and find those nuggets of truth, and trust me, there are some real head scratchers in this batch.
To put it lightly, like Trump calling his opponents scum at the Department of Justice, and a judge actually ordering a plane full of deported Venezuelans to turn around mid-flight. Plus, Elon Musk potentially buying influence in the GOP with a $100 million donation. It's like, where do we even begin with all this?
Well, I think the Department of Justice speech is a pretty good place to start, right?
Yeah.
It's not every day you see a president using that kind of language, especially with the DOJ logo right there behind him.
Yeah. The optics of that were pretty wild, almost like he was using the DOJ as some kind of prop. And having people like Michael Flynn, a former Trump administration official, in the audience,
Right.
not exactly helping, I'd say.
Yeah, the presence of figures like Flynn definitely signals something. But what really stood out to me was how Trump described his role. He called himself the chief law enforcement officer.
Right. That one really threw me. It almost felt like he was intentionally blurring the lines between the executive branch and the judiciary.
Exactly. Traditionally, that phrase has been used informally to describe the attorney general who oversees the DOJ, right?
Yeah.
But for a president to just claim that title so directly, that raises some serious concerns about the separation of powers. It almost suggests that he wants more control over the legal system, maybe even using it for, political ends instead of impartial justice.
Yeah, it definitely feels like he's treating the DOJ as more of a weapon against his enemies.
Huh.
And that whole scum comment, just yikes. It's not just rude. It feels like a way to dehumanize anyone who opposes him, making it easier to, justify harsher actions against them.
It's a tactic we've seen before, right? This kind of inflammatory language to create an us versus them mentality.
Yeah.
Very effective at silencing dissent and rallying a base. But it comes at a cost. Eroding civil discourse and weakening democratic institutions.
And this pattern of, targeted legal action, it's not just in that speech. Look at Trump's approach to immigration. He's invoking this really old law from the 18th century to fast-track deportations of anyone he considers a gang member, which on the surface it might sound reasonable, but
the devil is in the details, right? This law is so vague. It gives the administration so much power to target individuals based on, flimsy evidence or even just prejudice.
And it's causing a lot of international incidents. El Salvador is pushing back. There are legal challenges everywhere. And we even had that case where a judge had to order a deportation flight to turn around in midair.
It's definitely raising eyebrows. Some legal experts are saying it's a way to bypass modern legal safeguards and achieve political goals.
So it's not just about immigration. It's about how the administration is using its power and, interpreting the law.
Exactly. And these are just a couple of examples. It seems to point to a pattern of, some might call it an aggressive use of executive power. And it's really sparking debate about the future of American democracy.
Well, and speaking of pushing boundaries, we have to talk about the spending bill. It's more like a slashing bill with all the cuts to programs like Veterans Affairs and education.
It's certainly causing a lot of controversy. And the fact that it passed with the help of several Senate Democrats shows just how complex the political landscape is these days.
It seems like the Democratic Party is having a tough time countering Trump's agenda. You have some Democrats siding with him on this bill, and they're getting a lot of backlash for it.
It really highlights those deep divisions within the Democratic Party. There's a debate happening about how to approach this presidency, compromise and seek common ground, or hold firm against his policies.
Yeah.
It's a tough spot to be in, for sure.
And then you have someone like Senator Ron Johnson, who just dismissed concerns about the impact on veterans, called reports about the Zablocki VA Medical Center being negatively affected overblown. It's like he's not even acknowledging the very real consequences, especially for vulnerable populations.
Yeah, that kind of dismissiveness is concerning, especially when you think about the sacrifices veterans have made. Makes you wonder whose interests are really being prioritized when these budget decisions are made.
A good question indeed. And it's not just veterans. It's about the impact these cuts will have on everyone who relies on those services. Education, healthcare, environmental protection, it's a lot to lose.
The long-term consequences could be huge, but the debate is far from over. It will be interesting to see how it all unfolds.
Oh, and speaking of unfolding, we've got the whole DEI crackdown to unpack too. The Trump administration is going after diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. facing legal challenges, but still pushing forward.
This crackdown is really revealing a deep ideological divide. The administration says these programs are divisive and have an agenda, but supporters say they're vital for addressing systemic inequalities. It's a fundamental disagreement about what kind of society we want to build.
And they're not just talking about it, they're actually trying to put a provision into contracts that would ban DEI initiatives, even after a judge blocked a similar attempt. It's like they're ignoring the courts and just doubling down.
It definitely raises questions about their commitment to the rule of law. Critics are worried it sets a dangerous precedent, like ignoring rulings they don't like.
So much to digest here. Trump pushing boundaries, a spending bill causing controversy, and a crackdown on diversity initiatives. And we haven't even touched on Elon Musk yet. This is shaping up to be a deep dive indeed.
Oh, we've only just scratched the surface. Musk's role in all of this is fascinating, and we'll get into that next.
All right, everyone, buckle up. We're entering the Elon Musk zone. He's not just a tech billionaire anymore. He's a major political player. Special advisor to the president and running the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE for short.
Yeah, BOGE.
Oh.
They're in charge of restructuring and streamlining government agencies, cutting costs and increasing efficiency. But their methods are, well, causing quite a stir.
To say the least, like cutting funding for bomb-sniffing dogs, even for food and vet care.
It's a perfect example of the debate around DOGE's approach. Are they making smart choices to eliminate waste, or are they cutting essential services?
It's not just the dogs either. They've overseen tons of firings, including that attempt to just fire all probationary federal workers at once. Thankfully, a judge blocked that. It feels like they're putting speed and cost-cutting over, like, due process and the well-being of government employees.
This aggressive restructuring has a lot of people worried about abuses of power. And some are wondering if this push for efficiency is actually making the government less effective overall.
And then there's that rumor about Musk donating $100 million to Trump's political operation. That's not just a donation, it's a whole statement.
A donation that size would give him a lot of influence within the GOP. And it raises a big question about money in politics. Could this translate into, favors or policies that benefit Musk?
It feels like we're watching a whole new power dynamic emerge, where tech billionaires like Musk have a huge influence over the government.
It's something we need to watch closely. Technology, wealth, and politics are colliding in a really complex way, and it's impacting how our government works.
Wow. So we've got Trump pushing boundaries, a spending bill that's causing chaos, a crackdown on diversity, and Elon Musk becoming a political force to be reckoned with. What stands out most to you at this point?
What I find most striking is how interconnected it all is. These aren't separate events. They're all part of a larger story about power dynamics in America.
You're right. And it's not just about what's happening, it's about what it means for the future. We're seeing a total realignment of political forces, and it's making the future pretty uncertain.
But uncertainty can also lead to opportunity. It's a chance to reevaluate our priorities, think critically, and demand more from our leaders. This is a time for thoughtful discussion, honest debate, and recommitting to the principles of a healthy democracy.
One thing that really stood out to me was the situation with Tesla and the tariffs. It's almost like a textbook case of unintended consequences, Trump's tariffs were supposed to help American businesses, but now companies like Tesla are facing retaliation from other countries.
It definitely shows how interconnected the global economy really is. When you mess with trade flows, you get ripple effects that are hard to predict. Those tariffs that were meant to boost American manufacturing are actually hurting American companies that rely on, global supply chains.
And it's kind of ironic considering how close Elon Musk is to the administration. While he's leading DOGE and pushing for government efficiency, his own company is getting squeezed.
Yeah, it really highlights that tension between nationalist economic policies and the reality of globalization. It's hard to isolate yourself economically these days without feeling the consequences.
And speaking of consequences, we got to talk about that deportation flight that had to turn around mid-air. Sending those Venezuelan deportees to El Salvador even after a judge stepped in. It felt like a real overreach of power.
It definitely raises questions about the balance of power, right, between the executive branch and the judiciary. Going ahead with the deportation despite a court order, it suggests that maybe they're willing to push the limits of their power.
Yeah, it creates this impression that they're above the law, that they can ignore rulings they don't like. And that's a pretty dangerous precedent, for any democracy.
It erodes trust in the legal system and the whole idea of checks and balances. If they can just disregard judicial orders, who knows what kind of power abuses could happen.
And speaking of pushing boundaries, what about those student protests at Columbia University? Students protesting some of the administration's policies, and the government responds by revoking visas and deporting some of them.
Yeah, that really sparked a debate about free speech and the rights of foreign students on American campuses. The administration said they were just enforcing immigration laws, but critics saw it as like an attempt to silence dissent and activism.
It sends a pretty scary message, don't you think? Basically saying, if you disagree with us, you might get kicked out of the country. That's a scary thought for anyone, especially students who are supposed to be encouraged to think critically.
It does make you wonder if the government is trying to stifle dissent and create an atmosphere of fear on campuses. Protesting is such a fundamental right in a democracy. Any attempt to suppress it should be, closely examined.
On that note, it seems like the Democratic Party is having a tough time too. They're struggling to counter Trump's tactics, and their message isn't resonating.
The latest polls show that voters are losing faith in the Democrats, especially when it comes to the economy. It's like they're losing the messaging war. And that's a problem if they want to regain power.
It seems like they're always reacting to Trump instead of setting their own agenda, like they're constantly on defense, which puts them at a disadvantage.
They need to find a way to articulate a clear vision for the future, something that really resonates with voters, something that offers a real alternative to Trump's policies, not just criticism.
Okay, so we talked about Trump, the Democrats. Now let's bring it back to Elon Musk. DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, is making some serious waves in Washington.
Right, their whole goal is to streamline government, cut costs, and boost efficiency. But their methods are definitely controversial.
Efficiency seems to be a code word for huge cuts and a complete overhaul of government agencies. They're cutting funding for everything, USPS, TSA, even trying to cut Social Security benefits, saying it's full of fraud and waste.
People have mixed feelings about these cuts. Supporters say they're way overdue, that the government is bloated and inefficient. But critics say they're going too far, cutting services people depend on and weakening the safety net for vulnerable populations.
It's like they think smaller government is always better no matter what, without considering the real-world effects of those cuts.
It's an old debate, isn't it? What's the right role for the government? Minimal intervention and efficiency, or a more active role in providing services and regulating the economy?
And it's not just about the policies, it's how they're being implemented. A lot of people are criticizing DOGE for being too aggressive, almost authoritarian.
Yeah, those mass firings and disregard for due process have people worried about abuses of power. It seems like they're operating with a real sense of urgency, and that's making some people nervous.
Like they're trying to completely transform the government overnight, and not everyone's on board with that.
It's creating uncertainty and anxiety for government workers.
Yeah.
And it raises the question, is this push for efficiency actually making the government less effective overall?
Let's be real, the optics aren't great. You have Trump, who's known for his extravagant lifestyle, partnering with the richest man on the planet to shrink the government.
It definitely plays into that narrative of elitism and being out of touch with everyday Americans.
Yeah.
Like the administration cares more about the wealthy and powerful than the working class.
And then you add in Musk's potential $100 million donation to Trump's political operation, and it just amplifies that perception.
That kind of money buys a lot of influence. And it raises questions about whether we're heading towards a system where wealth equals power, where billionaires can just buy their way into political influence. That's dangerous territory for any democracy.
It undermines the whole idea of equal representation, doesn't it? If political power is concentrated in the hands of a few wealthy people, it creates an unfair system for everyone else.
It also erodes trust in the system. When people believe the government only cares about the wealthy, they're less likely to participate.
So it's like all these things are colliding and reshaping the political landscape, right? An assertive president, a struggling opposition, a powerful tech billionaire, and a government in the middle of a radical makeover. It's a lot to take in.
It's definitely a time of huge political upheaval. The old rules are changing, and the balance of power is shifting. And it's still unfolding, so it's hard to say where it's all going.
It feels like we're in uncharted territory, and it's hard to predict the future.
But one thing is for sure. This is a moment that deserves our attention. We need to be informed, engaged, and ready to participate in the conversation about our country's future. If we're not careful, we might end up in a future we don't even recognize.
It can be overwhelming with all this information and the speed at which things are changing, but that's why we do this, right? To help people understand what's happening and feel empowered to participate.
Exactly. Knowledge is power, and the more informed we are, the better prepared we'll be to navigate these times and build the future we want.
It's a lot to process, that's for sure. And honestly, it's starting to feel like, I don't know, constant whiplash, jumping from one shocking headline to the next. What worries me is that it's all starting to feel normal.
Yeah.
Like we're getting used to how outrageous it all is.
That's the real danger, right?
Yeah.
Normalization. When these kinds of things, the over-the-top rhetoric, ignoring the rules, grabbing power when they become everyday occurrences, we lose sight of them as threats. We become desensitized.
Like that frog in boiling water, right?
Mhm.
Doesn't realize it's being cooked until it's too late.
Exactly. It's this slow chipping away at democratic principles, a creep towards a more authoritarian way of governing. And it can sneak up on you if you're not paying attention.
It's not even just the actions, it's the words that come with them. Constantly demonizing the other side, calling everything fake news, attacking the media. It creates this climate of fear and suspicion.
It's really damaging, this kind of rhetoric. It undermines the whole point of debate and exchanging ideas. Instead of engaging with different viewpoints, we're told to see anyone who disagrees as an enemy, someone to be silenced.
Yeah, facts don't seem to matter as much anymore. It's all about loyalty and like blind allegiance. It's almost like they're changing the rules of the game so that winning, no matter how, is the only thing that matters.
And when you shut down dissent, when you stop critical thinking, you create an echo chamber. That's where bad ideas can take root, and people in power can get away with anything.
So what can we even do about it? Is there a way to push back? Or are we just like doomed to be a cautionary tale in the history books?
That's the big question, isn't it? I think it comes down to collective action. We need to recommit to the values and institutions that a healthy democracy needs. Support those organizations that are fighting for voting rights, holding those in power accountable, upholding the rule of law.
It's a bit daunting, to be honest. Feels like we're up against some pretty huge forces.
Oh, it's a challenge, no doubt. But history is full of examples of people coming together and overcoming seemingly impossible odds. Look at the civil rights movement, the fight for women's suffrage, LGBTQ plus equality. They all faced massive resistance, but ultimately they succeeded because people didn't give up.
So you're saying we can't afford to be complacent. We can't just sit back and hope for the best.
Exactly. We have to be active in shaping the future. Stay informed, have those hard conversations, and make our voices heard. Support candidates who share our values, hold our elected officials accountable, participate in the political process, at every level.
It's a call to action then, a reminder that democracy is something we have to work for, not just something that happens.
That's it. And it all starts with understanding the challenges and what happens if we do nothing. That's what we've tried to do today, give you the information you need to join this conversation.
So to our listeners, as you continue your own deep dive into all of this, think about what role you want to play. Will you be a spectator, or will you join the fight for a better future? The choice is yours.
And remember, this deep dive is just a starting point. Keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep talking about it. That's how we find solutions and create a better future for everyone.
Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Stay curious and stay engaged.